The Massachusetts sky darkened rapidly on that autumn afternoon in 1897. Heavy grey clouds hung over the landscape, heralding an imminent storm. The carriage advanced with difficulty along the muddy road that wound through the marshes, moving farther and farther away from the small town of Blackwater. Eleanor Duskmoor gazed through the foggy window, her slender fingers nervously clutching the silver medallion she wore around her neck. At 28, she was returning to the family property after 15 years of absence. The telegram she had received 3 days ago was succinct. Matriarch deceased. Presence required for reading of the will. "We're almost there, miss," the coachman informed her, his hoarse voice cutting through the silence. "Nobody's been to that property for years. They say the place is cursed." Eleanor did not respond. The stories about Duskmoor Manor and its family were well known throughout the county. Isolation, mysterious deaths, unexplained disappearances. She herself had been sent to Boston as a young girl to live with distant relatives after her parents' deaths. The carriage rounded a bend, and finally, the mansion appeared in the distance. Even in the dim light of dusk, it was possible to see the state of deterioration of the property. What had once been an imposing Victorian construction now stood like a decaying skeleton against the stormy sky. Wild ivy covered much of the facade, and several windows were broken or completely boarded up. "I can't go beyond this point, miss," said the coachman, stopping the carriage about 100 yards from the rusty gates. "No man from Blackwater approaches this place after sunset." Eleanor sighed, paid the agreed amount, and descended with her small suitcase. "I'll return in a week to fetch you," the man promised, already turning the carriage to return to town. Alone, Eleanor walked to the gates. The metallic creak as she pushed them echoed through the damp air like a moan of pain. The path to the main entrance was covered with dead leaves and weeds. As she approached the door, she noticed it was ajar. "Hello," she called, her voice sounding strangely muffled in the dense air. "Is anyone here?" Only silence answered. With hesitation, Eleanor pushed the heavy oak door and entered the main hall. The smell of mold and abandonment was suffocating. The little light that entered through the dirty windows revealed furniture covered by dusty sheets, like silent ghosts awaiting her return. A sudden noise made Eleanor turn abruptly. At the top of the main staircase, a thin, hunched figure was watching her. "You finally returned, Miss Eleanor," said the trembling voice. It was Martha, the old housekeeper, now visibly aged. "Lady Agnes waited for you until her last breath." "Martha, you're still here?" asked Eleanor, surprised. "I thought everyone had left years ago." The elderly woman slowly descended the steps, leaning on the banister. "Some oaths cannot be broken, child. Your great-aunt Agnes made me promise to remain until you returned. But why me? I barely knew my great-aunt." Martha reached the foot of the stairs, her grey eyes studying Eleanor intently. "Because you are the last pure-blooded Duskmoor." Thunder echoed in the distance, making the mansion's windows tremble. Martha took a candelabra and lit it with shaking hands. "Come, child, there is much to be explained, and the lawyer will arrive tomorrow for the reading of the will. Tonight you must learn the true history of your family." Eleanor followed the housekeeper through the dark corridors of the mansion, the candelabra casting dancing shadows on the walls. They arrived at a small sitting room where a fireplace had been recently lit. "Sit," Martha ordered, indicating a worn leather armchair. "I will fetch something your great-aunt left for you." While waiting, Eleanor observed the room. Despite the general abandonment of the mansion, this chamber seemed to have been preserved. On the walls, family portraits watched her with severe gazes. She recognized her parents in one of the smaller paintings, her father with the same distant look she remembered, her mother with a tense smile that never reached her eyes. Martha returned carrying a small carved wooden box. "Before I give you this, I must warn you, Miss Eleanor. There are secrets in this family that have been kept silent for generations, secrets that your great-aunt believed only you could face. The housekeeper placed the box on a side table and opened it with a small key she wore around her neck. From inside, she removed a book bound in dark leather, its pages yellowed by time. Agnes Duskmoor's diary, Martha explained. Begun on the day of her marriage in 1832 and kept until her death a week ago. Eleanor carefully took the book, feeling its weight in her hands. On the cover, a strange symbol was engraved, a circle intertwined with what appeared to be a tree with exposed roots. Your great-aunt instructed that you should read this diary before the reading of the will. She believed that only by understanding the past could you face what is to come. What is to come? Asked Eleanor, a chill running down her spine. What are you talking about, Martha? The old woman approached the window, observing the marshes that stretched beyond the property. The rain was beginning to fall, beating against the glass in an irregular rhythm. The curse, child. The curse that has haunted the Duskmoors for almost a century. Martha turned, her face partially illuminated by the flickering light of the fire. Have you noticed the medallion you carry, identical to the symbol on the diary's cover? Eleanor instinctively touched the silver medallion she never removed. It was a gift from my mother before she died. She said it would protect me, and it has protected you all these years. But now that you've returned to the mansion, not even the medallion can hide you for long. Hide me from what? A violent crash shook the house, causing both women to start. The flames in the fireplace flickered, almost extinguishing. Read the diary, Miss Eleanor, whispered Martha, her gaze fixed on the shadows that seemed to deepen in the corners of the room. Read it tonight and understand. Tomorrow, when the lawyer arrives, you will have to make a decision that will affect not only your fate, but that of all of us. Morning arrived with a dense fog that covered the marshes and enveloped Duskmoor Manor like a shroud. Eleanor had not slept. After finishing reading her great-aunt's diary, she had remained seated in the armchair, watching the flames in the fireplace diminish until they became embers, her world completely transformed by the revelations of the previous night. The diary narrated a story that defied her understanding. In 1832, her great-aunt Agnes, then a young woman from a prosperous but declining family, had married Thaddeus Duskmoor, owner of vast lands and the newly built mansion. The marriage, however, concealed a darker purpose. The Duskmoors had made a pact decades before, a pact sealed with blood that guaranteed prosperity and longevity in exchange for periodic sacrifices. Each generation, a family member had to be offered to the marshes. Agnes had described in disturbing detail the rituals performed under the great black oak that stood in the center of the marshes, and how silence about these acts was the only protection against retaliation from those who had been sacrificed. Miss Eleanor? Martha's voice brought her back to the present. The housekeeper entered the room, carrying a tray with tea and toast. Mr. Blackwood will arrive in an hour for the reading of the will. Eleanor nodded, realizing she was still holding the diary tightly. Martha, did you know about the pact, the sacrifices? The old woman placed the tray on the table and sighed deeply. I was born in this house, miss. My mother served the Duskmoors before me, and her mother before her. Some things don't need to be said to be known. But how can this be real? These things don't happen. Martha approached, and with surprising gentleness touched Eleanor's face. Did you read to the end about your parents? Eleanor swallowed hard. The last pages of the diary revealed the most painful truth of all. Her parents had not died in an accident, as she had always been told. Her father, Cornelius Duskmoor, had been chosen as the sacrifice of his generation. Her mother, Elizabeth, upon discovering the truth, had tried to flee with young Eleanor. Both were found before they could leave the property. My mother, she tried to save me. Yes, confirmed Martha. Your mother discovered that your father had been chosen, but also that there was a plan for you to be next, should his sacrifice not be sufficient. Elizabeth was a brave woman. She confronted Agnes and the other family members. On the night they tried to escape, there was an intervention. "You mean they were murdered?" said Eleanor, her voice cold. Martha looked away. "Not by human hands, miss. The pact has its guardians. When someone tries to break it or reveal its secrets, they appear. And why was I spared? Your great-aunt interceded. She convinced the others that you were too young to pose a threat, and that it would be more valuable to keep you alive as a possible continuation of the lineage. The medallion your mother gave you, it protects you, hides your presence from those who guard the pact. Agnes ensured you were sent away to Boston, where you would be safe. Eleanor touched the medallion, feeling its cold metal against her skin. And now she's dead, and she called me back. Because you are the last, miss, the last Duskmoor. With Agnes's death, the pact is weakened. You can renew it or break it once and for all." The sound of wheels on gravel interrupted the conversation. Martha approached the window. "Mr. Blackwood has arrived early. Shall I take him to the library for the reading of the will?" In the library, lawyer Ezekiel Blackwood was waiting. He was a middle-aged man, thin and with a meticulously trimmed mustache. He wore an impeccable black suit that contrasted with the decay around him. "Miss Duskmoor," he greeted, slightly inclining his head. "My condolences for your loss." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood, although I must confess I barely knew my great-aunt." The lawyer indicated a chair for Eleanor to sit. Martha remained standing near the door like a silent sentinel. "Well, let's get to the matter at hand," said Blackwood, opening his leather portfolio and removing several documents. "Agnes Duskmoor's will is quite straightforward. All the property, including the mansion, the surrounding lands, and the family's remaining investments are left to you, her only living heir." Eleanor showed no surprise. After reading the diary, she had already expected this. "There is, however, a condition," continued the lawyer, adjusting his glasses. "You must reside in Duskmoor Manor for at least 1 year from the date of acceptance of the inheritance. Otherwise, everything will be donated to the Massachusetts Historical Society." "A year?" Eleanor frowned. Why would she require that? Blackwood cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. Lady Agnes mentioned that certain family traditions need to be maintained. She was quite insistent on this point. Eleanor exchanged a significant look with Martha. The traditions to which Agnes referred were, without doubt, the rituals described in the diary. "There is one more thing," added Blackwood, removing a sealed envelope from his portfolio. "Your great-aunt left this letter to be delivered to you in private after the reading of the will." Eleanor took the envelope, noticing the same symbol from the diary imprinted on the wax seal. After the lawyer left, she opened it with trembling fingers. The letter revealed that the pact had been made in 1789 by her great-great-grandfather, Jonathan Duskmoor. Each generation, a Duskmoor was sacrificed to entities in the marshes in exchange for prosperity. Those sacrificed became trapped guardians of the pact. Her parents had discovered a ritual to break the pact, but were killed before they could complete it. The medallion Eleanor wore was created by her mother as protection. Agnes's letter explained that Eleanor now had a choice: renew the pact or break it forever. Both paths required sacrifice, and the decision had to be made on the next full moon, just 7 days away. That afternoon, Eleanor discovered a hidden box containing Jonathan's original writings and her mother's notes. The documents revealed that the pact could be broken by a voluntary sacrifice, someone pure enough to absorb the darkness of all the trapped souls. Her mother had prepared for this, knowing Eleanor was born under the full moon, a necessary condition for the ritual. "I need to see the oak up close," Eleanor told Martha. "Tomorrow, at dawn." Despite Martha's warnings about the dangers, the next morning they ventured into the marshes. The path was treacherous, winding through twisted vegetation and deceptive ground. After an hour of careful walking, they reached a small elevation where the massive black oak stood. "The soul oak," whispered Martha, stopping at a respectful distance. "We should not approach any closer." But Eleanor felt a strange compulsion pulling her toward the tree. It was as if the oak was calling her, inviting her to approach. Without fully realizing what she was doing, she took a step forward. "Miss Eleanor!" Martha's alarmed voice brought her back to reality. "Don't come any closer. That's how they lure their victims." Suddenly, the air around them grew colder. Among the distant trees, pale figures moved, not exactly walking, but gliding over the marshy ground. They were human forms, but there was something deeply wrong about their movements. "The guardians," whispered Martha. "They rarely appear during the day." One figure, ahead of the others, seemed familiar. A woman with long dark hair, wearing a white dress stained dark on the chest and hem. "Mother!" The word escaped Eleanor's lips before she could contain it. The figure stopped and turned slowly, revealing a face that was simultaneously that of Elizabeth Duskmoor and something completely different. The eyes were bottomless black pits. The skin had a sickly translucence. "Not your mother anymore," said Martha, pulling Eleanor back. "Run!" They fled back to the mansion, the silent guardians pursuing them to the edge of the property before retreating into the mist. That night, Eleanor heard voices whispering to her from the walls, from the floor, from the very air around her. The trapped souls of her ancestors calling to her, demanding either renewal or release. For the next 3 days, Eleanor studied the rituals described in Jonathan's book and her mother's notes. She learned that the pact was originally made during a harsh winter that threatened to destroy the family. Jonathan had sacrificed his wife to entities dwelling in the marshes, and in return, the Duskmoors prospered while others failed. But the price was terrible. Those sacrificed did not die but became trapped between worlds, forced to serve as guardians of the pact that condemned them. With each generation, another Duskmoor was offered, strengthening the entity's hold on the family. The ritual to break the pact required a voluntary sacrifice at the Black Oak during the full moon, someone born under the same moon, offering themselves freely to absorb the darkness of all previous sacrifices. Eleanor had been born exactly under these conditions. As the full moon approached, the mansion itself seemed to resist her plans. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut, and the voices grew louder, more insistent. The guardians appeared at the windows at night, their pale faces pressed against the glass, their black eyes staring at Eleanor with a mixture of hatred and pleading. Martha grew increasingly anxious. "They know what you're planning," she warned. "They will try to stop you." On the eve of the full moon, a violent storm descended upon the manor. Wind howled through the broken windows, rain lashed against the walls, and lightning illuminated the marshes in brief, terrifying flashes. In these moments, Eleanor could see dozens of figures surrounding the house, drawing closer with each passing hour. "They're coming," Martha said, her voice trembling as she helped Eleanor prepare the ritual components. "The pact is almost completely broken now. They can enter the house soon." Eleanor placed the silver dagger, the vial of consecrated oil, and the black crystals into a small bag. "I know what I have to do," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "My mother tried to save me. Now I must save them all." As midnight approached, the front door of the mansion burst open with a tremendous crash. Cold, fetid air rushed in, carrying with it the smell of the marshes. The candles flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness, broken only by flashes of lightning. "They're inside," whispered Martha, clutching Eleanor's arm. "We must go now, through the back way." They fled through the kitchen and out into the storm. The rain was so heavy, it was difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Martha led the way, following a path only she knew, away from the main trail and through a denser part of the marshes. "This way is longer but safer," she explained as they struggled through the mud and tangled vegetation. "They will expect us to take the direct path to the oak." But the Guardians were not so easily evaded. As they approached a narrow crossing between two pools of dark water, pale figures emerged from the mist ahead of them. Among them was the form of Eleanor's father, his eyes hollow pits, his mouth open in a silent scream. "Back!" Martha cried, pulling Eleanor in another direction. "We must find another way." They ran blindly through the marshes, the rain stinging their faces, the mud sucking at their boots. Behind them, the silent Guardians pursued, never tiring, never slowing. Twice more they were forced to change direction when spectral figures appeared to block their path. "They're herding us," Eleanor realized suddenly, "driving us away from the oak." "No," Martha replied, her face grim in the lightning flashes. "They're driving us towards something else." As they crested a small rise, Eleanor saw what Martha meant. Ahead of them lay a pool of black water, perfectly still despite the rain lashing its surface. Around it stood stone pillars, ancient and worn, carved with symbols similar to those in Jonathan's book. "The binding pool," Martha whispered. "This is where the entities first emerged, where Jonathan made the original pact. It's older than the oak, more powerful. And more dangerous," Eleanor added, feeling a cold dread that had nothing to do with the rain soaking her clothes. They turned to retreat, but found their way blocked by a semicircle of Guardians, at least 20 pale figures, including both of Eleanor's parents, standing side by side at the front of the group. Behind them, more shapes were emerging from the mist, generations of Duskmoors trapped in eternal servitude. "There's no other way," Eleanor said, gripping Martha's hand. "We have to go through them." "They'll tear us apart," Martha replied, her voice breaking with fear. Eleanor touched the medallion at her throat. "Not while I wear this. Stay close to me." Taking a deep breath, Eleanor walked directly toward the spectral figures of her parents. The Guardians watched her approach, their black eyes following her every movement. When she was just a few feet away, Eleanor removed the medallion from her neck and held it before her like a shield. "I am Eleanor Duskmoor," she declared, her voice carrying over the storm. "I have come to end this." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the Guardians parted, creating a narrow path between them. As Eleanor and Martha passed through, the spectral figures turned to watch them, their faces showing a mixture of hatred, hope, and terrible hunger. They reached the black oak just as the full moon broke through the storm clouds, bathing the clearing in silver light. The massive tree seemed alive in the moonlight, its branches swaying despite the now calming wind, its roots writhing in the soft earth like serpents. "They've allowed us to come here," Martha said, looking back at the ring of pale figures that now surrounded the clearing, keeping their distance but watching intently. "Why?" "Because this is where it must end," Eleanor replied, removing the ritual components from her bag. One way or another. Following her mother's notes, Eleanor placed the black crystals in a circle around the oak, each one positioned to align with the roots that emerged from the ground. She then uncorked the vial of consecrated oil and poured it in a thin line connecting the crystals, forming a complex pattern that matched the symbol on her medallion. "What now?" Martha asked, her eyes darting nervously to the silent watchers at the edge of the clearing. "Now I make my choice," Eleanor said, taking the silver dagger from the bag. "The ritual requires blood freely given. I can either renew the pact, binding another generation to this curse, or I can break it by offering myself in place of all those who came before." Martha's eyes widened in horror. "You can't sacrifice yourself. Your mother died trying to prevent exactly that." "She died trying to save me from being sacrificed against my will," Eleanor corrected gently. "This is different. This is my choice." Before Martha could protest further, Eleanor stepped into the center of the circle, directly before the massive trunk of the oak. She could feel the power emanating from it, ancient, hungry, patient. "I am the last of the Duskmoors," she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I come to end the silence that has bound my family for generations." The guardians at the edge of the clearing moved restlessly, their forms seeming to flicker in the moonlight. Among them, the figures of Eleanor's parents stepped forward slightly, their black eyes fixed on their daughter. Eleanor raised the silver dagger, its blade catching the moonlight. "I offer my blood, freely given, not to renew the pact, but to break it forever." She pressed the blade against her palm and drew it across her skin. Blood welled up, dark in the moonlight, and dripped onto the exposed root at her feet. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The ground beneath them trembled. The oak's branches thrashed violently, and a low, moaning sound emerged from deep within its trunk. The guardians at the edge of the clearing began to move forward, their movements no longer slow and dreamlike, but urgent, desperate. "They're coming!" Martha cried, backing away in terror. "Stay outside the circle," Eleanor commanded, her voice strangely calm. "Whatever happens, don't interfere." The guardians reached the edge of the crystal circle, but could not cross it. They pressed against an invisible barrier, their pale hands clawing at the air, their black eyes fixed on Eleanor with a hunger that transcended death. Eleanor continued the ritual, reciting the words her mother had transcribed from Jonathan's original writings. As she spoke, she felt a strange sensation building within her. A cold pressure that seemed to emanate from the oak itself, reaching into her mind, her heart, her very soul. Images flashed before her eyes, memories that were not her own. She saw Jonathan Duskmoor kneeling in this same spot, offering his wife to the entities that dwelled in the marshes. She felt Agnes's guilt as she participated in sacrifice after sacrifice, maintaining the family's prosperity through blood and silence. She experienced her father's terror as he realized he had been chosen, and her mother's desperate courage as she tried to save her child from the same fate. The pressure built until Eleanor thought her head would burst. The guardians were screaming now, though no sound emerged from their gaping mouths. Their forms began to change, becoming less human, more like the twisted shapes glimpsed in nightmares. "Eleanor!" Martha's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Something's wrong. This isn't what was supposed to happen." But Eleanor could no longer respond. The ritual had taken on a life of its own, drawing power from her blood, from the oak, from the very land itself. She felt herself being pulled in two directions, part of her remaining in the circle, part being drawn into the oak, into the darkness that had sustained and cursed her family for generations. With the last of her strength, Eleanor pressed her bleeding palm directly against the trunk of the oak. "I break the silence," she whispered. "I end the pact. With my blood freely given, I set them free." A blinding flash of light erupted from the point where her blood touched the tree. The oak split down the middle with a deafening crack, its ancient wood tearing apart to reveal a swirling darkness within. The guardians shrieked silently as they were pulled toward this void, their forms elongating, dissolving, being absorbed into the rift. Eleanor felt herself falling, drawn inexorably toward the darkness. But as she teetered on the edge of consciousness, strong hands gripped her shoulders, pulling her back. "Not you," said a voice that Eleanor recognized with a shock of joy. "Not my daughter." Through blurred vision, Eleanor saw her mother's face. Not the twisted, spectral version that had pursued them through the marshes, but Elizabeth as she had been in life, her eyes clear and loving. "Mother," Eleanor whispered, her strength fading. "You've freed us," Elizabeth said, her form already beginning to fade. "All of us. The pact is broken. But the price has been paid many times over." Her father appeared beside her mother, his hand outstretched but unable to touch his daughter. "You've given us peace, Eleanor. Now live your life free from our burden." The spectral forms of her parents smiled one last time before dissolving into mist. Around them, the other guardians were disappearing as well, their expressions transformed from hunger and hatred to relief and release. The rift in the oak closed with a final thunderous crack. The tree, split down the middle but somehow still standing, shuddered once more and was still. The crystals surrounding it crumbled to dust, and the pattern of oil ignited briefly before burning away. Eleanor collapsed to the ground, exhausted beyond measure. Martha rushed to her side, cradling her head. "Is it over?" Eleanor asked weakly. Martha looked around at the clearing, now empty of spectral figures, at the split oak standing like a monument to centuries of suffering, at the marshes that already seemed less oppressive, less hungry. "Yes, child," she said, tears streaming down her weathered face. "It's over. You've done what generations of Duskmoors could not. You've broken the silence." As dawn broke over the marshes, Eleanor and Martha made their slow way back to the mansion. The house, too, seemed transformed, lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from its foundations. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor began the process of restoring Duskmoor Manor. She opened windows that had been sealed for decades, cleared away the ivy that choked the facade, and removed the dusty sheets that had covered the furniture like shrouds. The townspeople of Blackwater, hearing that the curse was broken, gradually lost their fear of the property. Some even came to offer help with the restoration, bringing with them stories of the Duskmoors that had been whispered for generations. Eleanor listened to these tales, neither confirming nor denying their truth. The real story, the blood pact, the sacrifices, the trapped souls, would remain known only to her and Martha. Some silences, she had learned, protected not through fear, but through respect for those who had suffered. 1 year after breaking the pact, Eleanor stood in the family cemetery, placing flowers on the newly installed memorial stone that bore the names of all the Duskmoors who had been sacrificed over the generations. The marshes beyond the property had begun to heal, the twisted vegetation giving way to healthier growth, the water running clearer. "I've decided to stay," she told Martha, who had remained as housekeeper and companion. "Not because of Agnes's will, but because this is where I belong. This land has seen enough suffering. It deserves to know peace." Martha nodded, understanding in her eyes. "And what of the oak?" "It remains as a reminder," Eleanor replied, touching the medallion she still wore around her neck, no longer as protection, but as a memorial. "Some wounds never fully heal, but they can become part of who we are without defining us." As they walked back to the house, Eleanor felt a sense of peace she had never known. The Duskmoor legacy would continue, but transformed, no longer cursed by blood and bound by silence, but dedicated to healing and truth. Behind them, in the distance, the split oak stood against the horizon, broken but enduring, a testament to both the darkness of the past and the possibility of redemption.